discuss maybe the fact that our names are getting thrown in the mud, Karen?
You know,
Can we have that conversation?
Let's just go ahead and kick the
Let's go.
conversation
Isn't this a
off around-
positive conversation?
Yeah, let's just go ahead and kick that off, because it's so funny that you mentioned that, Karen, because last night I was talking to my children for the umpteenth time, and I said, who in the world decided that Karen needed to be synonymous with somebody? Well, we'll just say what it is. Oh, an angry white woman. Now, for you, Karen, that's really terrible because you happen to be white, but you're not angry. That's terrible.
My kids would disagree, but okay.
I was gonna say my kids would disagree with that one.
I also joke that I'm like, dude, it doesn't. That's not. They don't spell it the way they're saying it. So like maybe it doesn't count. My kids are like, no, it counts. You're totally a Karen.
I don't know. I don't know who decided that they were going to be the nickname police and just randomly choose, the name.
Mhm.
Of course, I don't know. Maybe I would, or maybe I wouldn't be I'm not offended, but I definitely am a little bothered by the fact that every time somebody does something that seems egregious, they want to just go out there and they want to call them, oh, you're
a Karen.
You're the Amy Cooper, or you're the Karen whatever. And I'm just like, why are you like lambasting my name? I'm not.
Hey, Karen, I have not watched it, but there is a reality TV show with a Karen, and she's always angry. So that's how this whole meme got started.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Thank you. I honestly didn't know that.
I didn't know that either. I don't watch that much reality TV, and here of late, I don't really watch a whole lot of TV in general. So you're schooling me today on what the real definition, the meaning of Karen actually is. But I want us to really try to start looking at people as individuals for who they are.
Yes.
I was just going to say that. It's like, where does somebody had turned around and said, Karen is that angry black woman.
Yeah.
You talk about slam basting. It's like, we can't put anybody in the category based on the color of their skin. If you're an angry person, great. Angry person, all good. But why do we have to say angry white woman? It's like, where does that come from? That just amazes me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think part of the problem is that people are so quick to want to just tear other people down, and they like to categorize because it just makes it easier, right? But the problem with quick categorization turns into discrimination on some level, because you're immediately now categorizing a group of like-minded individuals, whether they're the same in behavior, they're the same in the way that they articulate themselves, something about them that is common thread. You want to just automatically lump everybody into that category, which is no different than racism, really, because I had it growing up. I lived next door to a white family who we didn't live in the country. We didn't live in the country per se, but we definitely didn't live in the city, and it was some kind of place between the country and the suburbs. And the house next to us had a young white couple. They had 2 children, and I don't know whose father it was, if it was the wife or the husband, but one of their fathers used to live in the city, and he got robbed. He got robbed by some black kids, and I don't know what his history with black people had been prior to that event, but I do know that that last event left an indelible mark in his mind, because when he moved in with his children, and he subsequently, should have been a great thing because he got to spend time with his grandkids all the time, but every time my sisters and brothers and I were out in the yard and his grandkids were out in the yard, if he came out and saw that they were out in the yard and we were in the yard, he would immediately tell them, go inside, you can't be around those violent people. And he was talking about us as kids, and I think I was probably in middle school, and his grandkids were in elementary school. And so sometimes people wonder, how does racism start? And it can be very subtle. And again, his experience may have come from being violently attacked from a group of individuals that just so happen to have the same color skin that I have. but that didn't make I've never been violent, at least not unless I'm provoked. Let's just be honest.
Shall we check with your kids?
Yeah, but in all seriousness, it baffled me as a kid. I never understood, because it wasn't just that he was telling his grandkids this silently by ushering them in the house. Like, he was very vocal about all Black people, and he would make statements like that. I don't want you around those people because all Black people are violent, which kind of is no different than this Karen, oh, there's another Karen incident, which then makes, and unfortunately what it does is it causes now non-white people to look at a white woman, unfortunately, that maybe is acting a little bit in an unkind manner. And maybe she, in her mind, she might feel justified, and sometimes they don't. And I think that's the real issue is, with this Amy Cooper, who called the police on the Black gentleman who was at the park trying to bird watch. It was clearly evident from at least the footage that we saw that he was not trying to harm her. But yet, in her mind, she felt like, oh, I'm going to call the cops because I know they're going to come and get him and all this stuff. And unfortunately, it backfired for her. And fortunately for him, it backfired for her. But when you have people who do things like that, it sets this, it creates this narrative that is not kind for other people who maybe either have the same name or who look the same or some of it, but they're not that individual. So what do you think we should be doing when we start hearing people call out other Karens, or maybe they're going to start calling people Steves, guys that are doing the
he's a big white guy. Watch out for Steve.
Look out for that nasty Steve.
Yeah, or better yet, I see Rajiv has joined us. Maybe they're going to start saying, oh, can you believe there's another Rajiv that's out there doing this particular behavior? How can we as a society kind of quell the need to want to categorize everybody and start looking at people as individuals? What do you guys think?
Well, I think the challenge is with the media. I mean, because even this Karen thing is, if it's reality TV, it's a bunch of TV people probably taking, a personality aspect of this person and highlighting it. That person might be calm and normal 99% of the time, but everything they film are looking for that one outburst, and then they highlight that because that is the extreme that causes people to be interested because, wow, this lady really gets off, and the media just creates these poor images of people, of countries, of races, of whatever, all for the name of the big dollar and trying to, get ratings and make money.
Yeah, I actually, listen, TV, and my husband's in television, so I know what they do with those reality shows, and how they set them up, and absolutely they create characters, and, let's use the great term, fake news. I think the reality is that those stories, unfortunately, are out there, and that's the reality of what the news is capturing as well. The news wouldn't have stories to tell if the stories weren't there. And this goes for across the world. And the reality is it's that perfect story that you were just talking about, it's that systemic problem starting with how we teach our children. Mm-hmm. And if we didn't teach our children that those Black people were bad and violent, our children wouldn't think Black people are violent and nasty. I can tell you from my own perspective, because it all shocks me. I do not see the difference in people, and some people think I'm a bit crazy. I literally do not see the difference in people. Black, white, Chinese, whatever it is. We are in an area here in Vancouver where our kids in their school now are the minority. And most of the kids at the school are either Chinese or Persian. And my children do not see the difference in any of their friends. Never has any of my kids come home mentioned different accents, different skin colors, different ways of being, nothing. We celebrate all different cultures at our school throughout the school year, whether it's Christmas, it's Chinese New Year, we celebrate it all. And so my kids have not been exposed to racism because they've never seen it in me. They've never seen it in my husband. They don't see it in our community, and they're not really exposed to it. And we may live in a bubble, but I would say we don't, because there's lots of it here, and there's lots of times I've been exposed to it in our community. But when you teach your children there is no difference, you don't point out differences, you celebrate differences. I have 3 kids with neuro differences. So talk about differences. It's the same way. They could be bullied, they could be pointed out, all of those things for their neuro differences. They're adopted. They're not all the same skin color. You know, they're not all from the same background. But it just doesn't even, it's not even a point in our house, because I don't look at the world that way. And so they don't look at the world that way. It's really that simple. So the challenge goes is that kids and generations keep getting taught and taught and taught the same seeds. They're planted in the same way. They hear the conversations. Parents have CNN and Fox News and every other station blasting in the background of their house 24/7. And so that's what they're exposed to. If they're not exposed to it, they don't see differences in their friends. They don't grow up with it, you know, and they end up becoming advocates for their friends, because what I can guarantee you is that if any of my kids' friends got shut down because of their race, my kids would be the first one to stand up for them, because they're standing up for them as a friend. They're not standing up for them as a race. And they wouldn't even understand it. They'd be like, what the hell? Like they just wouldn't get it. So I think that's our problem, is that the kids keep getting taught and taught and taught, generation after generation. And until we change that, it's never going to literally change. At least right now, there's a generation of kids that are being exposed to seeing what's going on in the news right now, which is, this isn't right. You know, things do have to change. They're walking with their parents, they're marching with their parents, and they're seeing and understanding why we have to stand up for each other as one versus, you know, anything else. And there's a whole world marching to be one versus, and standing up for each other. So that to me is flat out the problem, is that until we stop that generation to generation, it's never going to change.
I think part of the problem, to piggyback on that though, is also the way they're taught, but it's also social media. I mean, there's just no way to avoid what goes on social media. And, you know, so my kids are exposed to that. They're exposed to things before I can even tell them. You know, back in the day, before Facebook and before Snapchat and everything, you know, if you didn't get it on the news, you didn't know about it. You know what I mean? And now it's like looping every 5 seconds. So even though we don't teach them, you know, we teach individuality and all that, you know, you're not seeing a color or anything like you were talking about, Jacqueline, same thing, but it's there on social media. So then it lends to the conversation of, well, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. This isn't it. What can we, and then having the conversation inside, well, what can we do about it? And to your point, marching and doing all of those things. But even though they're not being taught it, they're seeing it. And it's like how, you know, it's perception versus reality, right? There's a meme I've seen where a lioness is holding a cub, but it shows 2 different sides. So it looks like one side she's eating the cub, and the other side you can see the face of the cub. So it's the mom holding the cub like they're supposed to do, because that's what they do. You know what I mean? So that's the thing. They see this, and it's up to us to say, you know what? No, this isn't how it's supposed to be. This isn't right. This is ridiculous, and that kind of a thing. So while it's taught, it's also shown to them all over the place as well. And then it has to be, well, what's right, what's wrong, what's going on, and really even maybe doing some research and finding out what the whole story is, because the media is only feeding you one side of the story.
And don't disagree with that. I mean, my kids, my oldest just started on social media, and he started on social media when he was about 11, for example. So, you know, I think we have to remember too, that if we're not feeding them the information, teaching them as they go, I mean, my kids at 7 and 8 are not on social media. They're not allowed on Instagram and TikTok and all of those things. They are on YouTube, but they're not allowed on all of the other channels yet. And that's part of us as parenting as well, is, are our 8-year-olds on TikTok and Instagram and all of those things? I mean, that's part of what we have to, that's part of the problem in some ways, is that if you're not going to sit and spend the time with your kids, then they shouldn't be on social. A 7-year-old does not need to be on Instagram. I don't get that one. There's lots of things in the world a kid can do, but they don't need to sit on Instagram for, at the age of 7 and 8 years old. So by the time my kid got onto Instagram at 11, at least at that point, the seeds had been planted. What we know about kids is most of their belief systems are instilled in them before the age of 7. That's the programming that goes on in our brains and our hearts at an energetic level. So we can make sure those programs are instilled and beliefs are instilled before 7. Then at least you got a good chance at that point.
Got a fighting chance.
Yeah, exactly. To plant the seeds in the right way. And and that's still our responsibility as parents. We've gone through a time right now during COVID where, honestly, we're all a bit done having our kids with us 24/7. And I'm the first one to admit that, but the reality is, and sat on media, right? For how much more media time did they have during COVID? Like, we can all admit that.
No,
I did not play with my kids 24/7. But if you're going to have kids, it's your responsibility, right? To make sure that they're not sitting watching, whether it's CNN or Fox News, or sitting on Instagram for, 12 hours a day. It goes both ways. And if you don't want to do that, don't become a parent. That's kind of my answer. If you don't want to, be overseeing that, and being part of those conversations or part of that learning with your kids, they get enough from us with our own anger management issues and frustrations and patience. And, they'll learn all that good stuff through us, and they don't need it through every social media channel as well. Not before they're 7 and 8 years old.
Well,
I think also
bravo on that, because I think when it's so almost the norm these days, which I find to be a bit disheartening. When you look around and you see so many young people, and when I say young people, really, I mean children, little kids that are walking around with, I'm on the fence about kids, very young kids having electronic devices. It's part of our society, our culture, so I get that. But when there is no body that's monitoring what they're watching, what they're doing, the parental controls haven't even been activated on the device. Children are curious beings, and they're
absolutely
going to explore different avenues. And sometimes they see stuff, they hear stuff, don't even have an idea as to what they're hearing or what they're seeing. I shared a conversation with Steve last week about my twin daughters I have 5 kids, and the twins are the youngest, and they're 17. And they had this conversation that they were playing on this game, and they didn't even, it made me feel good to know that in a way my kids are still sheltered despite how much stuff is readily available to them at their fingertips. They were playing a game with one of their friends, and it was called, one of the questions came up about, when's the last time you've taken the walk of shame? Now, first of all, I was appalled that my daughters were playing a game. They're 17 and they're talking about the walk of shame. But on the other hand, I felt really proud of my daughters, because all of their friends that were playing the game with them, they knew what kind of background that my daughters come from. So they really knew that they didn't understand what that phrase meant. But when they said, how many times have you done the walk of shame? Raise your however many fingers. Everybody else in the group, nobody put their hands up except for my 2 daughters. And one twin puts up 4 fingers and the other one puts up 5. And automatically everyone's looking at them dumbfounded, going, you've done the walk of shame 5 times and the other one's 4? What in the world? And my daughters were looking at them and they were like, well, yeah, when we do something that we know, when our mom finds out that she's going to be disappointed in us, we do the walk of shame because we walk around with our head hanging low. And I started laughing because their friends start laughing. They were like, that's not the walk of shame we were talking about. And they were like, well, what walk of shame are they talking about? Their friends wouldn't even tell them. And so my daughters were asking me. So I had to share with them what they were talking about. And they were horrified because they were like, oh my gosh, if I had known that, I would have kept my hands down. And that's why nobody put their fingers up. So I think, you know, when you talk about parental responsibility in terms of educating our children, where do we cross that line or draw the line in the sand in terms of personal responsibility, personal accountability? Because I mean, again, I have stories all day long about how different people have, you know, said very mean things. And one that comes to mind regarding children was, and this only happened maybe 5 years ago, I was in a Target, I'm going down an aisle, I'm looking for something, and I come across this cart with a little boy who was probably maybe 3 years old at most. And as soon as he sees me, he was not Black. I was in California, and he was Hispanic. And that little boy, as soon as he saw me, he goes, oh, look, there's a N-word. And he said it so loud. And I was just like startled because this little boy's only like 3 years old. And I'm thinking to myself, am I really hearing this? What did I just hear? Now, mind you, I'm going to actually, I don't usually describe people, but in this instance, I want to show you just how pervasive and how easy our children can pick up on things and how it is imperative that we have to be mindful of our own conscious thoughts. So again, the little boy was Hispanic, and then I'm guessing he was there with his mother. There were a couple of adult females there. There were 2 adult females, and then a couple of other little children. But what was striking to me is that one of the adult women, who I think was the mother, she was wearing what people call a wife beater shirt. She had a bunch of tattoos all up and down her arms. She had some tattoos on her neck, and she was dressed in a manner, and her presentation, if I were a person that would categorize, that would stereotype, I would have said, oh, she must have been a part of some gang, because that's exactly how she looked. And yet to listen to her talk, it was kind of like, I was so still taken aback by the little boy saying what he did, because he kept saying it over and over again, and he was not quiet when he was doing this. And so people are starting to look down the aisle, and I'm looking and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what do I do? And immediately, though, I'm guessing it was his mom, she looks at him, she looks at me, and I can see horror on her face. And she says to him, how dare you say that? That's so rude. You should not be saying that. And then the other woman comes around. She was similarly dressed, and she's just laughing at this whole thing. And I'm guessing it was the mom. She turns to the other woman and she goes, who taught him that word? Who said that to him? Because I don't talk like that. It must have been you or so-and-so, you know. And then she turns to me again and she goes, oh, I'm so sorry. Now, here's the thing where I feel like I let my own self down, because I was so stunned. What did I say? I just said, oh, that's okay. And I walked out of the aisle because I was so still taken aback that this little 3-year-old had called me this word, and somebody taught him that a person that looks like me, he should use that word. And there's no doubt in my mind, at 3, he has no idea any kinds of meanings or connotations that are attributed to that word. He does not know whatsoever. In the same instance that my 17-year-olds were talking about a phrase that they didn't know anything about, our kids are they're always talking and saying things, and they don't know the full context. So at what point do we, not just as parents, but as adults, do we have personal responsibility to then bring not only correction, but the proper education when we see young people? Because teachers, they come across this and they encounter this all the time. They're not their students' parents per se, but they still, in my opinion, have play a role in helping to bring correction into the picture on whatever level that they feel comfortable in doing it. But I think that we need to do that. So what do you guys think about that? Parental responsibility, but also personal responsibility and accountability.
I think parental responsibility is the minute you become a parent, period.
Yes.
Like, end of discussion. Like, I gave birth to my 2 kids, so the minute they were born, that I was their parent. Actually, before then, but you know, like Jacqueline adopted. You know what I mean? There's different ways people become parents nowadays. So the second that child is in your, I'm going to say it this way, even though I don't mean it this way.
In your care, body or other. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But the second the child is in your possession, like the second somebody hands you that child, and this is your child now, that then is parental responsibility. I don't care the age. Like, the age doesn't matter. So it's literally from the second that your responsibility. And I also think the accountability is the same thing, because you're at least teaching that. They may not understand that, they may not know what you're even talking about, but I've had so many my kids are 18 and 14, and I've had so many conversations. My son, especially, because he's got ADD and he thinks everything is ridiculous and funny, and he's gonna get the crap beat out of him because he thinks he's gonna say something wrong to the wrong person. And I say to them all the time, though, what you do may trigger somebody else. Mm-hmm. So you have to own up to what you've done. Because he's like, what do? I didn't do anything. You know what I mean? I get that all the time from him at 14. And I'm like, well, you know what? You may have done something that triggered this. You don't know. So I think it always stems from, even in school, like, it's always like, no matter what, it's, well, because, every time my kids will be like, well, they did this. And I'm like, well, what did you do? Like, that was always my response back, because as much as I love them, you never know, right? You know what I mean? So I think that's what it is like, they may not have even realized they did something, or maybe they didn't do anything and that person just reacted in a manner. And then that conversation becomes, well, that person reacted in a manner, and I don't know, I don't pretend to have a story about why a person reacts the way they do, but it lends to the conversation. Well, I know you didn't do anything, but this person just reacted that way. I don't know why, but this is why it bothered you. So, I don't, maybe don't do something like that again. Maybe that's what triggered them, because you never know what's going on behind closed doors either with other people and the way they react. So I think it's an immediate thing that you have that accountability and parental responsibility. And by the way, I don't ever think the parental responsibility goes away either. Like, I think as long I'm not kidding. It's
a totally lifetime commitment. Yeah. Okay, Rajiv, we need Rajiv's perspective on this, because he is our energetic, centered happiness guru. And this is what I want to hear is, whether you all, Rajiv is in Dubai. So you have such a mixed, like, you are the melting pot to me in Dubai of literally every culture you could imagine. And people are treated so differently in some respects in Dubai. I was blessed to meet Rajiv in Dubai, and so this is where we met, which was pretty phenomenal. So it's a real melting pot there of people, and from oppression and control to obviously the very wealthy and lots in between, and a completely different world than our North American world on so many aspects. So Rajiv, what do you do with your kids to keep them centered and balanced through?
So first of all, I want to say hi to everyone. I didn't want to cut in the conversation because it was such a lovely conversation going on. So thank you all for this amazing conversation. Hi, Karen and Steve as well. Jackie, a big kiss. I love the richness of this conversation, and it's funny. I was thinking while you guys were saying you're always a parent. It's true, and I was thinking you're kind of a parent before you're a parent also. As a human, when you come in, right? Before I was a father, and I was, we were trying to have kids for 10 years before we actually have our own. So it's a long story, but I remember, the connection to children, right? And I think as people, everybody can share and learn and teach, right? And children are so beautiful because of the fact that they really model what you go out there and model, and so I would like to share two things. Karen, I love that story of yours in the supermarket, because I was born and raised in Spain, and I'm Indian by origin, and spent about 6 to 8 years in Nigeria, and then I moved in Seattle, Washington. I lived there for about 6-7 years, and now I'm living in Dubai for 20-something years. So it's crazy, Jackie. I never knew what color my skin was for the longest time. It sounds really crazy, but you know, being born in Spain, having done my schooling there when I was a kid, I didn't know what it was to be anything but just a normal kid. Does that make any sense? We never looked in the mirror and said, "Oh, you're different," because we spoke the same languages, we all ate the same food, we all were the same. But yet, you know, we were never made to feel different. And this is back in the 70s and then in the 80s when I was in Nigeria. It was really interesting. I was in an international school my whole life. So, you know, and I bring this back to you guys, and I want to see how it applies to you now as we grow up as adults and we look at our kids. But when you live in a world where you experience each other, so you go to each other's houses, you eat, you know, there's a little difference in the food, but it's still very similar. Does that make sense? So we grew up with this mentality where we are 90% the same, maybe 95% the same, and there's 5% difference, right? And yet everyone's pointing out the differences. But the 90% is what we all alike, right? That's the similarities, and that's the beautiful thing of being human, right? And I always scratch my head going, where are we missing this gap? Do we not see that we're almost 99% the same, right? So to answer your question, to bring balance to the kids and to bring, you know, to center the kids, I think the most important thing is to role model. I think kids just, more than what you say is how you live and how you are every single day. When they see you oozing with love and seeing no difference, then they pick that up themselves, right? That's one. And two is, you know, consciously making an effort, I think, to expose each of us and, you know, and our families to different differences, because when we meet these differences, we see the similarities. And the most powerful thing about the world is to find the beautiful similarity that we all have. And then you realize that, oh my God, the differences are so minor, right? And it enriches us. So as parents, we need to make that effort to expand. You know, in Dubai, we're lucky because we have all cultures living, just like in the US. But one of the differences I find here is that it's very integrated, so it's all mixed, right? I mean, so like when Jackie, you came, you know, there's someone speaking Hindi there, and then there's Urdu, and there's Arabic. And
completely, like everywhere you go, it's just,
everywhere.
It didn't matter whether it's your hotel, the mall,
you know, we all have a funny accent speaking English, I guess. And then, but
there
we all speak
is
English.
there is nobody from Dubai that lives in Dubai, right? So,
and then my friends who are Emirati from Dubai are so lovely that you go to their house and you eat, you know, we eat with them, sure, you know, just the culture. And then you start going, oh my God, you're so much Indian culture. And you're like, yeah, when we were kids, we used to go to India, right? And then you start realizing that's what the world is. I mean, guys, when you look at, as parents, and I know all of your parents here, the world's really a small place. And it saddens me, the news, when you listen to everything that's going on. And of course, we empathize with everything that's happening, but it hurts even that much more when you see people miss that. When they miss that opportunity that we all have every single moment, living in these countries where you have all this diversity and richness, and we've somehow missed it. And now we have an opportunity for our children to kind of step up there and live it in a way where they can take it beyond what we've ever experienced. You know, like you said, Jackie, we don't know what our skin color is, and you know, we're human. And the most beautiful thing, I want to change this. When everyone was talking about this, I was thinking, we are all from Earth, right? It's about time we just start talking about Earth. Exactly. Why are we talking about all these different places?
Right. I mean, it's the big conversation is that we are only separated by the political borders that are created for each of us, and by the perception. I think that's what you're talking about a lot too, Karen. It's the lens in which we view the world. So when we say to our kids, well, what did you do? You know, it's that lens that we all look at the world differently. So in any situation, I don't care if your friends are different colors, different races, different origins, you know, it's just the lens in which we see the world, which is different for every single human being on this planet, no matter where you're from. And, you know, it's the challenge. You know, I try and get inside my own kids' heads because their view of the world is so remarkably different than mine because of their brain differences, you know. And that's what I always try and do is I try and get down and see a little bit of the world through their lens, because it is so different than what I have ever experienced. Or maybe it's not, and maybe I, you know, did have a narrow difference growing up and probably still do in lots of ways. So, yeah,
I think, Jack, you're hitting on a point with children is children are the example of living for the moment and the day.
Completely.
You know, they don't have that mental, oh, well, last week this happened.
Oh, no, they do, but yeah.
I mean, we get
They
older,
don't
we
dwell.
carry all this garbage with us. You know?
It's always what's next.
Yeah.
It is, yeah. But that's the thing, is what's that seed? So for them, if it's, you know, my buddy was nasty to me at recess 3 days ago, but what's the bigger seed that we're talking about, that a 3-year-old boy is using language that is completely and totally not appropriate? What's those seeds that we have planted or have been planted in them that they carry through their life? You know, we talk about this in regards to beliefs that we grow up with, that our parents or society has planted. And these are the beliefs that carry us throughout our lives, that then we become grown-ups and we're in therapy because of what happened to us when we were kids, right? And we've carried those belief systems with us all the way through our life, both at an energetic level and at a conscious level, you know, both ways. I know for my kids, you know, as adoptive kids, they have an energy that at a cellular level that will carry them throughout their lifetime. We're literally trying to, you know, change it at a cellular level because of those beliefs, you know, abandonment, trauma in child's trauma, I mean, from the minute they were born, right? The stress that their birth mother carried, and so many other things, those are carried through them and will carry through them in their whole life. So how do we make those changes to a certain extent with beliefs that have been carried right from utero, you know, depending on where the birth mother was at, you know? And you said this, Karen, it's like they're yours from the minute they come in your arms. Well, they're yours from the minute that seed was planted in whoever's stomach and what you carried from before they were born. And that's even the challenge, is some of those, I don't want to say beliefs as in conscious beliefs, but that stress and anxiety, let's say, potentially, that the birth mother went through, the toxicity that went into potentially their bodies before they were born. Even these things are coming right through from the time they come out of utero, right? So it's amazing to think back even that far, and how we need to work on changing those programs. And, you know, Steve, you work on a lot of this, especially with your IMAP work that you do. And, you know, it's those programs that we have to work on from the time that they come into the world. And Rajiv, you nailed that, when it's, you know, how are we getting our kids to look at the world as one world versus the borders and religions and races that separate us?
Well, I also want to just say that I agree with everything that you all have said, and also piggyback on something you said, Rajiv, about we are teaching our children based not only what we say, but what we do. That really falls in line with something that my parents used to tell me when I was a young child, and something I remind my own kids all the time. People are watching you even when you don't know it. Right? So just because you don't see anybody directly looking at you does not mean there isn't still somebody watching you, watching your behavior. And that's so true with children, you know, in particular young children. But I think as I reflect on my children who are now young adults, even without them saying anything, they can still be watching me. And so I try to be very aware of even my own behaviors, because while I feel confident in the foundation I laid in and poured and built when they were young, I know that there's still opportunity for me to do something that maybe is not the most kind, that they might then look at and adapt and say, well, you know, it wasn't okay then, but I guess now that I'm this age, it's okay for me to now adopt it, because this is how mom lives. This is how mom acts. And so, you know, it's so true. People are watching us, and not even only our children, but other young people. When you're out and about, other young people are watching you. They're looking at you, and they're trying to, you know, make up their minds about what they think is cool. And sometimes kids think they pick the wrong things as being cool behavior.
I just
So
stopped the video.
we have to then, you know, figure out, how are we going to help bring correction in, especially if it's not our own child. I've seen neighborhood kids on rare occasions do some things that were, I mean, they weren't super bad. I mean, and when you talk about bad, that word is kind of subjective. It's, you know, because what one person thinks is a bad behavior, another person might just be, oh, that's, you know, that's no big deal. And of course it goes back to what they learned as a young person, what their experience is with that type of situation. But I have seen some kids sometimes misbehave, and, you know, I think to myself, do I just not say anything, or do I just continue letting them do what they're going to do, you know? And how do you guys feel about that when it's not your child, but you see other kids and they're doing something or they're saying something that isn't appropriate towards another person or another child because they're different? What do you guys, how do you guys feel that that should be handled?
You know what, you're bringing up a point which I was going to lead into is our kids have us, but there's a time in their lives where they start saying, well, that's mom and dad. What is everybody else doing? And they start looking for other role models, other people that they think are cool or smarter or whatever than their parents. And I can say that because my oldest turns 36 this year. So, I mean, my oldest is almost probably older than most of you.
I wish.
Oh
yeah, 35 forever. Yep, that's it. Yeah.
I was saying 21, but
yeah.
Right.
But kids, you know, the younger kids usually have parents around, and it's easy to defer and say, well, okay, it's the parent's responsibility. Because as soon as you jump into a situation with another kid, you're asking for the parents to come after you, because who are you to tell their child what to do? So that's one situation. But if they're in your home playing, if they're, you know, older, yeah, you can communicate and you can tell them that. I know in my own house, my son has brought over friends all through high school, have their game nights or D&D or whatever it is they're playing, and they often have filthy mouths. And my wife is like, you guys need to clean it up. and they've grown to appreciate her, but they also like, you know, is your sassy mom around? But, you know, in my own life, I grew up with parents who hardly ever swore. But I can remember at the age of, I think, 11, maybe 5th, 6th grade, I became aware of swearing, and I thought it was cool. So I just started swearing left and right. And I'm sure I drove my parents crazy. And I certainly drove my mom. She's like, okay, I'm going to take care of this. So when she'd hear me swear, she'd take a bar of soap and make me bar of soap. And that took about 3 times, and I started curving my swearing after that.
By the way, I curse like a sailor in real life. Not even gonna sugarcoat it. I curse. I mean, I'm from. It just is. But my kids actually ask if they can. It's like the funniest thing. They do ask if they curse, and sometimes, you know, they just let it out or whatever. But to your point, Karen, about parenting other kids, my mom is notorious for this. Like, we live in a townhouse, and she doesn't even care, you know. But I try to be like, if I know the kid, like if they're really close with me and I know them a long time, then I will say something, depending. We were at the other night, we were celebrating my son and my neighbor's daughter's graduation, and the mother asked the daughter to get water, and she was like, no. I'm like, you know what, your mother gave birth to you. Like, we always trump you. Like, I was joking with her. I'm like, by the way, like, we're moms, so we always trump you. You always should do something for us. Like, as a joke. And I was smiling, and she knew I was like sort of serious, but sort of joking. And she went to get the water, because I'm like, sometimes I feel like kids listen more to people who aren't their parents.
Yes.
They really do. And they respect more. I always get how great my kids are outside of this house. You know, and and in school, my daughter, not my son, he doesn't change for school, but you know, I always get that all the time. And it's like, are you sure you're talking about, you know, Nicole, or, you know, whatever. But that's the point, isn't it? You know, that's the whole point. And I think, you know, to Jacqueline's point, you know, you're doing the foundation, you're having from the beginning, the belief system and everything like that. And then other parents are saying, well, no, this isn't right. Or they're validating what we've said. You know what I'm saying? As parents, and the kid's like, well, maybe they would never admit it, of course, but maybe mommy was right, maybe daddy was right, kind of a thing. So I don't think if you don't know the kid, you should say something. It depends also, by the way, I think it depends on how far it goes in terms of what you say to a parent also. I had an instance last year where my son slept over a friend's house and the kid was saying anti-Semitic comments to my son. Yes, that was fun. And so I called the mom because I had known the mom. They've been friends for quite some time, at least 2 or 3 years, my son and this kid, Jonathan. And I was like, just so I'm not going to allow Jordan to come over for a little while. I think just things need to cool over. I never said they couldn't be friends anymore, but I was just like, look, this was not okay, kind of a thing. So I think in those type of instances, you have to say something. Sometimes it just doesn't warrant saying anything because you can just tell, like that kid in the supermarket, you can just tell that what would you have said at that instance that was going to change the situation really anyway?
Right.
You know what I mean? You could have schooled them and then what? You know what I mean? It's back to Jacqueline's point, it's their belief anyway. So that's what he was taught, that kid. So that's what he said. And you were probably better off by not saying anything because let the mother take care of it at that instance. You know what I mean? So I think I think it's depending on the situation too.
So I want to just ask you guys the same question in a reverse manner. See how this lands on you. If it was your kid and they misbehave and someone was to walk up, how would you react?
Honestly, if my kids was being that bad, I wouldn't. I would actually welcome it sometimes. I know that they sound a little ridiculous, but I don't think that I would be like, who are you? Because I think because of the way I feel like I do it with other kids. So I'm like, would be the hot calling the kettle black if I don't accept it, right?
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
I'm happy for people to call my kids out. They react. It's what you guys just said. The kids tend to react better when someone else says to it, because if it's just mom, it's the same old, rhetoric that we always spit out. But when somebody else comes and says it, they sit up and take notice and go, oh man, I went sideways, right? And it scares the crap out of them. Yes. So I'm good with that when strangers support, kids falling out of line. You know what? I do it myself. We have a rule in my house when kids are coming over for a play date, new kids or not, you got 3 strikes. If you bully, you're not nice, you're not inclusive, you got 3 strikes and then you're out, and then you don't get to come for play dates anymore. And I make that really clear with kids straight up. And I'm gentle about it, but I'm firm that I do not accept certain behavior at my house, period. I'm always like, I want you to come over because we like you, I think you're a terrific kid, but this behavior is not acceptable. And it's flat out in my house. There's no, I don't care who the kid is, but because I have guidelines that I want my kids to follow, and there's no way somebody else's behavior or learning is coming into my house and it's being accepted, and it's just flat out. And all the kids know that when they come here, and I'm not nasty about it. It's just, I see the light and I see the beauty in you, and you don't have to bring that into this, because that's not, and I literally will say to them, it's just not who you are. I know you're a really great kid. I know you're positive. I know you're awesome. And that whatever you just, are bringing here, that's not who you are. And I want you to come as who you are. It was such a Rajiv, that was such a Rajiv thing to say, but it's really what I do. And we will go through. It's like, I have this great kid that comes, but I know he's got some, an older brother who influences him and everything else. And so I've literally taken him aside and just said, listen, I love you. I think you're an amazing kid, but we're at strike 2 right now. So let's not get to strike 3. And I do the same thing with my kids. My kids get 3 strikes and then they're out.
Jackie, I love that. And the reason,
I love that.
The reason I was going to add to that, and I think you said it beautifully when you said this, it's how you speak to them, right?
Yeah.
It is, because I could yell at them, right, and say, oh, but I don't. You really have to let them know you see the beauty in who they are first, and that it's just these little things that don't support friendships, and it's the little things that tear friendships apart. Or when you've got 4 or 5 kids at your house having a play date and they're all trying to grab the attention or the spotlight or be the best, or that competitive nature. I've got all boys, so I've got the competitive nature always going on, right?
Well, I definitely have an experience where one of my kids was the one that was being called out, Rajiv. When my middle child was in junior high, he had asked to go to their junior high, I think it was like the 7th and 8th grade dance. And, it was an opportunity for kids that performed well. It was kind of like the end of the school year, a treat, something to just say that we appreciate you. And so he'd done well, and I knew that he was a well-behaved kid and never had any problems. So I thought, sure, why not go ahead and let him go? Well, it wasn't long before he came back home early from the dance, and I was curious. I was like, what's going on? Why are you here? Because I knew what time it was supposed to go until, and when he was supposed to be coming home, which was at least 2 hours later. And he just had his head hanging low, and he said, the principal wants to see you. And I'm like, what? The principal wants to see me about what? He goes,
now you're in trouble, Mom.
Yeah, the principal wants to see you. And he said, and I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to disappoint you. And I'm so confused, and I'm thinking, okay, is there something that I need to know before I get to the school? And he says, well, the principal's probably going to talk about my behavior, and I'm sorry. And that was pretty much all he said. Now, I immediately thought, okay, there's two ways I can handle this. I can either get really upset and just ream him without even knowing all the details, or I can just say, okay, let's just go and talk to the principal, and let's just find out what's going on, and then we'll figure out how to navigate the situation. So I went back to the school with them, went and had a conversation, and sure enough, the principal was waiting for me because we didn't live that far from the school. And we went into his office, and he said, I know that your son has normally been a very well-behaved student. I've never had problems with him, but today he did something that was, it really scared me, and I didn't expect him, of all students, to do that. And I was like thinking, oh my gosh, did he punch somebody? What did he do? He ended up getting, my son, he just was so excited about being able to be with his friends. And I think a little bit of I want to have the attention on me kind of factor, because he's a middle kid. He's in the middle, and his younger sisters, who are identical twins, always get a lot of attention. So I think in that moment, he was feeling himself, and he got up on one of the tables, because the dance was in the cafeteria. He got up on one of the tables and started doing all these dangerous things. And there was signs posted everywhere for kids not to be standing on the tables. Now, my son didn't tell me that before we went back to the school. And so I'm kind of like, as the principal sharing all this stuff, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, just take a deep breath, take a deep breath. You don't want to overreact, because, think about all the different things and reasons, potential reasons he could have been doing that. And let's just try to be very calm about this. And at the end of the day, we had a discussion. We even asked him what kind of punishment that he felt was appropriate, and the principal decided on how to handle it. And then I told my son there was also going to be discipline when he got home, because, we have certain rules about how we carry ourselves, and one of them is don't do dangerous things. And so, I didn't like kick him out of the house or anything like that, but, he had an appropriate discipline for a short period of time. So, but that was my first real encounter of somebody coming to me and telling me that my child was not responding in a way that I would have, just without thinking. Somebody tells me, oh, your son's the one that did that dangerous thing. And I'm thinking, who are you talking about? My kids don't do dangerous things, but yet he did. And so I had to quickly just say, okay, don't overreact. And especially as a single parent, you wear both hats, the good cop, the bad cop. And so when there are problems, it's a very fine line that you have to walk, so that you are stern, and that you try to make sure that your children are still, following the dictates that you have in your household, how you represent yourself. But you also want to make sure that you still foster a loving environment. And that's what I tried to bring to the table. I let my son know that, I wasn't happy that he did what he did, but I also understood how easy it is to get caught up in the excitement when you're with your friends and you just kind of forget yourself. But you did break one of our rules, and so there is going to be some, consequences to that. But I kind of like what you said, Jacqueline. I tried to keep a loving kind of tone about the whole thing instead of going off the deep end, because let's face it, we all want to believe that our children are perfect, even when we know they're not. And so when somebody approaches us and calls our children out on the one time in their whole life that they're not perfect, we want to get like all up in arms and think, how dare you come to me and tell me that my child did something that was offensive? How dare you tell me that my child's a bully? How dare something negative? We don't ever want to have somebody tell us that, but they're human, just like us. We were kids once. We may have even done some of the very same things that our children are now doing. And so we have to kind of remember that when we're trying to help our children, keep the love in the picture as much as possible, which also gives them room to make errors and mistakes, because how we respond when they're not perfect will go a long ways towards the adult that they will become when they're having an off day. Because I know as an adult, I can't count how many off days I've had. And especially as a single parent, I've had many off days, and yet my children still love me. They still give me grace. They still treat me with respect. And I try to do that with them, understanding up until they reach 18, mom is the iron fist. Once they turn 18.
I've said 21.
Well, 18 is when I kind of say, okay, now I can loosen it a little bit. But yes, until they're 21, I still have the final say so, but at least they have an opportunity to give some input between 18 and 21 if they're under my roof. If they're out on their own, you know, there's only so much.
They got to go.
My daughter's in college. I don't know what goes on, you know.
Okay, so let me give you another perspective on this, because most of my career I've been a manager. And when people correct our children, it's actually great preparation for when they get into the workplace, because we're no longer around and their boss may come with something valid or invalid. And how they respond to that, can make and break their career. If they hear the good feedback and act on it, they become better employees. If they don't, then they can spiral into trouble. My son,
really good point, Steve.
My son jokes with me how there were many days I came home and said, "Never do that." and it's like, Dad, I could tell exactly when you said that something happened at work, and then you tell me what exactly happened at work and why I should never do that. And so I asked him, I said, well, what did that do to you? He said, well, you taught me, Dad, what not to do on the job. And so, our kids learn from us, but they also need to learn from other people.
I also think, Karen, what you were saying earlier about the not my kid, you recognize that you heard what the principal had to say and you recognize that, yes, it was your kid. I think part of the problem systematically is the first question earlier was about teaching them and we talk about their beliefs and everything. A lot of times when the parents say not my kid and don't recognize when their kid is in fact doing something wrong, is also lending to the problem as well.
Yes.
It's my favorite thing of COVID when we all now go back begging to our teachers and saying, I'm so sorry. I now realize it wasn't you, it was my kid.
I always knew it was my sons. A lot of parents are like, oh, hell no.
Yeah. Completely and totally. But I love that. It's like all of a sudden everybody's parent, everybody's as a parent, the eyes have been opened wide to go, oh my God, it is my kid, right? Yeah. Some of us are very aware it is our kid, but
I want to recognize Karen for a second, because I think that was really beautiful when you were sharing about how you held love in your heart and you try not to overreact. I've got so much to learn from you, graceful parents, because we've got really young kids, and we're still at the failing stage of parents, right? So we don't know how to react. Sometimes we overreact. Sometimes we underreact. So it's amazing to learn tips from all of you, because I love you all. You guys are so graceful, and it's a beautiful feeling. But that question, I want to bring back something really powerful, because I think that question that you asked you know, at one point in time, when kids are in our house or it's someone we know, it's still tolerable. But I just wanted to put myself in the shoes of a parent who has no connection with, maybe got a play area and the kid, you know, some other kid comes in for these. And then Jacqueline, your point of how you approach the situation, and you know, you do it with love and you explain it with absolute, you know, in a graceful way. I think that's when every parent, regardless of where you are, more or less, it's like, you know, they can handle that pretty well because they feel, here's someone who's guiding them in a way that my kid is going to benefit from, as long as it doesn't bring down the kid's, you know, the ego, right? In a sense, you don't hurt them. And then we've seen the other side of the story where when an adult loses it and they yell and the kid, you know, gets in the shell. We've seen both sides of that. So I think the emphasis should go on, and again with managers as well, Steve, same concept is you know, it's paying attention to how we do it is more important than the fact that we do it. I think it's very important as an individual, as a human, to show up, right? Because you're there. If you don't show up, you have to show up, right? But you can do it gracefully, right? So Karen, you made a point about the supermarket, and then when you said you felt bad that you didn't say anything, right?
Right.
In hindsight, what do you wish you would have done?
That's a really good question, and one that I still to this day I can't even give you an answer, because I had empathy. Believe it or not, I had empathy for the mother. Again, I described the way that she looked, and I did that on purpose to say, in all of that, at no point did I tell myself she must have been a former gang member, which would have been easy for me to say, because where I lived and where this was, there was a very heavy gang presence. She fit like the stereotype of what a former gang member could have, you know, looked like. And so there's a lot of, you know, negative things that I could have thought, but in that moment, I just had empathy for her. I felt so bad for her that she was in this situation, and I felt like, I really do believe that she felt bad that her child had said that. I think she was conflicted because I could hear conflict in her voice. She wanted to do the right thing in that moment, which was to admonish her son, and then quickly turn her attention to the adult with her, because she knew, while it's terrible that her son said that, he's young, she knew he had to learn that from somebody. And so I just had so much empathy. I don't know to this day if I was in that situation again. I'm not sure what I would have said. I don't know.
And why I brought that up is because I think the most important lesson in situations like that, which are uncomfortable and we're on the receiving end, or it's what you said when you hold that space with love, right? And you say, well, regardless of where that came from, it's what are you receiving, and then what are you giving back? So we always have the ability to respond, and with children, that's the gift we can give. It's not like, you know, like we said, they're perfectly imperfect. All right, they're gonna do all these weird things, and we're gonna have to figure out. And as parents, we're going to be perfectly imperfect, and we're going to mess up too. Yeah. But ultimately, it's really being able to come back to it and understanding that, listen, we didn't know before we did it because we didn't know better. But where we stand today, are we able to respond? And if we start to train ourselves and our kids, I think that's the gift. I think that's the gift. And again, you guys have so much more experience than me, and as parents, I'm sure you can share a lot more experiences like that. But what I hear you say, it's so important to be in awareness of that space. Like you said, you held the space of love and didn't overreact. And Jacqueline was like, well, I was explaining to that kid, but I also said I was held firm. But the intent was love all along, right? So at the same time, it's that response, being able to respond. Because reactions where things go wrong, it appears to me. What's everyone's thoughts on that?
Well, I think that one of the main things that I got from that, Rajiv, a big one, is, you know, what you really showed was compassion, and you showed empathy towards the mother. And obviously we can't put that back on a 3-year-old, you know, and I think just that, and, you know, probably, you know, if you would literally said to the parent, I so appreciate you doing a correction on this, you know, and just showing, I mean, it's those weird things of showing compassion and gratitude that change and put that energy out. I'm not saying be grateful for being called a name like that, but being grateful to the parent for course correcting her child right away.
Yes.
And doing that publicly in front of people that they recognize the behavior was bad and they've done the correction on it. That's a big part of it, that, you know, when we're putting out the compassion and gratitude, you know, we all know this, right? The Dalai Lama talks about this, and most other religions, is when we're putting that compassion and gratitude and love first versus the anger and how you could have reacted.
Yes.
You know, that teaches in itself. And that's what Rajiv talks about as well through his work all the time. When we lead with that, that's more recognized than an angry Black woman stepping up going, what's your kid using the N-word, right? You could have you could have reacted in such a different way, and you didn't. You came from a place of empathy and compassion and understanding, and that teaches in such a large way, both to the parents, most importantly, and even to the child, because that energy comes off of you, right? And we all know that you can measure it. And I think that's the big part. And when we see, even in the Black Lives Matters marches and everything that's going on, the people that are getting down and kneeling, you know, that's compassion that we're seeing, and those images that we're seeing for so much of history, right? And whether that's our leaders doing it or other people, or white, you know, I hate these terms, but, you know, people coming together and sitting together, you know, that sitting in peace and sitting in love and sitting in compassion for a world that is not peaceful right now. And I think the more we keep putting that message out, is that the images we need our children to see. You know, obviously we know there's been lots of not good images out there, but it's the images of people coming together of all color, all races, from all different corners of the world, and sitting in peace and compassion and love together. And that's what's being planted. You know, you see the youth that are out there marching. We're not seeing the youth are not the violent ones going out there. They're using their voices, they're making a difference, and they're coming together in peace to make that difference for the rest of the world to see. And that's what I love about what you did in that moment. It wasn't turning around saying, you know, it's okay, but it's the fact you showed empathy and compassion.
And that's
so kudos for you, Mama. That was awesome. Don't ever turn around and say I could have done it differently. You did it just right.
Thank you. That and that's so true, because, you know, the rest of that day I do remember, and you touched on this, the different ways that I could have easily responded. I remember thinking to myself, I could have just, you know, gone ghetto, and you know, so when I say that word, sometimes people that know me, they look at me like, Karen, you don't have a ghetto bone in your body, because, you know, maybe I speak a little bit different than they do. I don't necessarily sound like I'm from the street or urban or whatever. All those different terms that people want to label someone that looks like me. And yet, yes, I've got ghetto and I've got street, I've got urban, I've got ebonics. I got it all up in me. I just bring it out at the appropriate times. And in that situation, that would not have served me well. It wouldn't have served
anybody, right?
Yeah,
it would have just made it would have like almost validated to everybody else. And you didn't, which was awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. It would have just cemented the lessons that he was already being taught. Yeah. And so, you know, I'm so grateful that, you know, my faith helps me every day, and my heart is filled with love, and that's how I live my life. I lead from a compassionate standpoint, and I'm so thankful that God really just helped me in that moment, because, you know, most other people, they probably would not have responded in that way, and then it would have turned into something even more.
That would have turned into that 1 minute Instagram moment, you know, that would have traveled, right? Yeah. Exactly. Angry Black woman meets old gang member.
Would have been a Karen.
You know, and the whole thing would have
been a Karen.
Sideways, right?
Full circle moment. It would have been, that's right, exactly. A Karen meme, except instead of it being you know, the angry white woman. It would have been the angry black woman who just so happens to not even have a black name, my kids and I laughed about this last night when we were talking about, because on the news they're talking about another Karen situation. And I said, when people hear my name, and I actually had this happen when I was growing up, people heard my name before they saw me and met me. And because of the way that I speak, I'm very articulate. When they would meet me for the first time, they would go, "You're black." And I would go, "Am I?"
Really?
Oh,
Nobody told me that.
Thanks for telling me that. And they're just like, "Oh, well, your name's Karen. Okay, what should it be?" And they're like, "You talk so proper. How am I supposed
Oh my God,
to
really?
talk?"
There's a black woman name? Oh my God, okay. Yeah.
Oh, believe me, there's California names. There are.
Oh, there you go.
You came from
My little
California.
bubble I live in, yeah.
So yeah,
I like my bubble.
so there's so many different ways that a person finding themselves in that situation could have handled it. And you know, that also speaks though to, again, for sure in this country, I can't speak to the other countries, but for sure in this country, you know, and we've touched on this a little bit on some of the other calls with my sons, because I have 2 sons and 3 daughters. With my sons, you know, I'm always having to have this conversation about how to act when you leave the home. You know, if you get pulled over by the police, what you should do. And even my daughters, I tell them kind of the same thing. You know, there is this it's almost like an unspoken rule in the Black community that in order for you to beat the stereotype, which is sad that I'm even saying these words, you have to be better. There is that unspoken mandate. We have to present ourselves, we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard of level in terms of our behavior, because if we get mad, then we are promoting the stereotype that, you know, as a black women are always angry. I don't know how many times I've heard people say that, and I think to myself, well, so are people in this culture, and so are people in that culture and that race. I'm human. People are going to get angry over certain situations, you know, but I tell my kids, just remember who you are, but you have to know in certain instances, people are going to hold you to a higher standard. Otherwise, they're just going to lean into their own misguided thoughts and ideologies about who they think you are. And with my children, it's a bit of a conundrum for some people, because my children's dad is white. They don't have the same color skin that I do. And even I think it was the other day, my 3 daughters were at a store, and this woman who was from the Middle East, she was looking at them and she kept going, "What are you? What country are you from?" Because she knew that they're not the same color as me. She couldn't tell that they were necessarily black, half black, but some people say that they look half Hispanic and half black, which I don't see that. Obviously I know, but then people in the Hispanic community, they look at my children and they know they're not half Hispanic and half black. But just the other day, they're being questioned. Well, what are you? I mean, I love your hair. Their hair texture is different than mine. It's very curly, but it's, you know, that's a whole nother conversation. It's different than mine. They look different than me. And so people will treat them even differently within the category of all that's going on. They're like, you can't be white or you can't be black. And I'm thinking to myself, at the end of the day, what does it matter? And that's what my daughters kept saying. What difference does it make what our biology is, other than the fact that we're people? That's what, you know, goes back to what you were saying, Reggie. We're all the same. Yes, our exterior is different and people can change that. Not to get political or anything, but we know we live in a day and age now where if you want to change what your outside looks like, you can do that by cosmetic surgery. There are so many different ways to change, but that doesn't change the commonality, which is that you're still a person, you're a human. So people have got to kind of work on the way that they see people. I think it goes back to what we're taught when we're children, what we see in the workplace, because even that can kind of mess with our heads based off of what we were taught, depending on the company that you work with or work for. There's some companies, and I'm a firm believer that what you see on the bottom that's allowed to occur on the bottom is because of what's at the top. The top, usually when there's problems, dissension, negativity within a company, and it's gone on for a season, usually the people at the top, they know about it. Whether or not they choose to do anything is a whole nother issue, and that's a heart matter. You should automatically, and I would think you would want to have everybody in your company, in the business, feeling like you support them in however manner that you can. Be supportive and showing love and taking steps to make sure that people aren't feeling ostracized for whatever reason, you know. And when there's discrepancies and disagreements, that there is a safe and respectable manner that our platform for them to come together so that you can develop a level of understanding and try to figure out what is that small difference that you talked about. Sorry, my dog is up there. Somebody must be at the door. So it's important that we try to work on that.
Okay, group, we've gone well past our hour. We always keep these conversations going as long as people want to keep talking about it, but if you need to drop off, feel free to leave. We are always glad to have people come. It's awesome, Jacqueline, Raji, to have you guys join us for the first time. Karen are faithful people with me, and they keep putting up with me, so I'm very thankful.